It's the least worst outcome, just to put a fine point on it, do you believe that any of that $55 billion ends up in the hands of terrorists?
I think that some of it will end up in the hands of the IRGC or of other entities, some of which are labeled terrorist. To some degree, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that every component of that can be prevented, but I can tell you this. Right now, we are not seeing the early delivery of funds going to that kind of endeavor at this point in time. Mm-hmm. I'm sure at some point some of it will, but that has never made the difference in what is happening there. Let me give you an example.
Major storm. It has life and death implications, and all the residents of the District of Columbia should treat it that way. We need the city's full cooperation. The snow we anticipate is wet and heavy, which means we can expect to see downed trees and power lines. The winds are expected to be 30 miles an hour up to 50 miles an hour through Saturday evening, and we believe that we are going to see wind pick up throughout the day. In fact, our forecasters call this event having thunder snow at parts of the storm.
Folks need to understand that this is a life-threatening type of storm. So if you do not need to be out, and what we're asking folks is, by 3 o'clock today, you need to be where you're going to be throughout this storm. This is a major storm. This is not an inch of snow that happens some part during the day. This is not an 8-inch storm that we've seen here in the past that's taken a couple days to clean up. We're talking about an excess of 2.5 feet of snow, heavy snow. And as the mayor mentioned, we're looking at potential for power outages. We've got a potential for roof collapses. Those are the types of things that we need to be able to respond to the residents that are out there.
The eastern United States is emerging rarely from a massive blizzard that dumped huge amounts of snow and led to the deaths of 29 people. Schools and government offices will remain closed in Washington on Monday. The mammoth snowstorm has walloped a dozen states, affecting an estimated 85 million residents who were told to stay indoors and off the roads for their own safety. The snowstorm has triggered widespread flooding along the shore in New Jersey and caused vast power outages. School districts in the state have announced closures for Monday.
Some 85 million residents were in the path of what many called Stormzilla or Stormageddon 2016. The blizzard dumped 26.8 inches of snow on New York City, making it the second largest snowstorm in its history. Baltimore saw its largest snowfall on record. By Sunday morning, from the Carolinas to Massachusetts, cities scrambled to dig themselves out from the snow and ice. A rare travel ban, which was declared in New York City, was lifted by 7 a.m. Sunday, but officials warned residents to remain vigilant.
Let's not misinterpret the travel ban. If it is essential travel, necessary travel, that's one thing. But if you do not need to be on the roads, you shouldn't be on the roads. 11
states, including Washington, D.C., declared a state of emergency, and mass transit remained closed throughout Sunday in the nation's capital. The economic impact of the storm is yet to be assessed. However, early estimates by the Weather Intelligence Service Planalytics says damage may be up to $850 million.
This is Fifth Avenue, New York City's premier shopping district, and normally on a weekend you'll find it teeming with shoppers. But as you can see, not today. And that just gives you a hint as to how bad weather like this takes its toll on the US economy, particularly in big financial centres. Analysts estimate that a barrage of wintry weather across the country in the first quarter of 2014 took 1.4% off US GDP.
And as we talk to some of those who were out and about, it's easy to see how New York City businesses lose money in a snowstorm.
We came down from Massachusetts to see a Broadway show, and they canceled on us.
Everything's closing down. The restaurant that we were just at was right across from the theater that we were going to, and they were trying to get everybody out so that they could send their employees home safely.
We are trying to have shopping, but almost everything is closed. Everything is wide. Nobody here, no taxi, nothing.
In 2014, an IHS Global Insight study found that one day's shutdown in New York could cost the state $700 million, including $152 million in lost retail sales. But it's not just retailers who suffer from snow like this. Factories can't ship out orders or receive new supplies. Construction work is halted and many businesses can't deliver their goods. More than 10,000 flights have also been cancelled this weekend across the US. Add to that the cost of snow removal and damage repair. And this starts to look like a very expensive way to enjoy a snowball fight.
A lot of Americans like to argue about the legal separation between church and state in the US. Many are quick to point out that the Constitution doesn't actually contain the phrase separation of church and state. On the other side of the debate, many will point to a wide variety of Supreme Court cases that interpret the Constitution to indeed establish a separation of church and state. And both sides will scream at each other until they're blue in the face, not listening to one another as they already are after hearing this story. A group of atheists just filed a federal lawsuit in Ohio that seeks to drop the phrase, "In God We Trust," from U.S. currency on the grounds that putting God's name on our money violates the separation of church and state. There are 41 plaintiffs in the case. They're led by a California attorney named Michael Newdow. He's the same guy who's tried to remove God from our money in the Pledge of Allegiance before, to no avail. Maybe he'll have better luck this time. His new suit argues that every time a person uses American money with "In God We Trust" printed on it, she's forced against her will to accept that there is a God and to redistribute that message to others, even though it might go against her personal beliefs. The suit also takes issue with the fact that there's no getting around this, since "In God We Trust" is everywhere on our money. The lawsuit itself is 112 pages long, and to further impress its disdain for God, it never spells out the word. Instead, it just keeps using G-D so as to avoid ever even acknowledging any God at all.
Is expected to give the green light this week to a controversial scientific technique developed in the United States. It allows human organs to be grown inside animals. A pig, sheep, or almost any other farm animal could now become your organ donor. Here's how it works. Human DNA is taken from the patient's body, then injected into a days-old animal embryo. The embryo lacks certain tissues, so it can carry human ones instead, like a heart or a liver. The risk of rejection by the eventual human recipient is small, as the new organs contain their own genetic material. However, there are concerns that animals might turn out to be uncomfortably human-like as a result of the procedure. The technique was originally pioneered in the U.S., but was later given a funding ban from America's top health agency. A group of leading Stanford scientists were left fuming at the restrictions. They wrote an open letter saying it would put key research at risk. Well, the conflict between progress and ethics is nothing new and has provided fertile ground for the imagination.
Tomorrow is perhaps the biggest day on the pro-life calendar, the annual March on Washington. We'll be keeping our eye on how the expected snowstorm affects the plans, but tonight, Chief Legal Correspondent Shannon Breen looks at another more long-term issue for the movement. Good evening, Shannon.
Hi, Brett. Well, ahead of Friday's March for Life, Planned Parenthood is hoping to shut down one of the pro-life movement's most prominent voices. The man behind those undercover videos that sparked a national conversation about the fetal tissue market. I spoke with David Daleiden exclusively today about the lawsuit against his group, the Center for Medical Progress, or CMP.
I don't think that a lot of people, myself included, were expecting Planned Parenthood to be willing to take that risk of opening up all of the details about their abortion practice and their baby parts trafficking business, opening all of that up into the court system and bringing it into the light of the law and the legal system.
The videos show conversations with senior Planned Parenthood officials who think they're discussing the transfer of body parts and organs to employees of a fetal tissue procurement company. In its lawsuit, Planned Parenthood calls CMP a, quote, complex criminal enterprise, saying false statements, illegal recordings, and the video smear campaign constitute a conspiracy to demonize and intimidate plaintiffs and to interfere with plaintiffs' operations. They continue, this conspiracy has cost plaintiffs millions of dollars and put the safety and security of Planned Parenthood's personnel and patients at serious risk. Attorney Jay Sekulow, who's defending one of CMP's other board members, says investigative journalism has solid legal protection.
It's done every day, and this is part of freedom of speech, and we're going to be arguing that aggressively. And a court should be very cautious about shutting down avenues of communication, including investigative journalism.
Also coming up in early March, the Supreme Court will hear arguments over a Texas abortion law that requires, among other things, that doctors have admitting privileges within 30 miles of their clinic.
Pro-life demonstrators here in Washington this afternoon, they braved the weather as well. They held the annual March for Life despite the harsh forecast. Chief Legal Correspondent Shannon Bream has the story.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a fight we can and will win.
2016 contender Carly Fiorina was one of several high-profile pro-life voices who joined thousands on the National Mall for the annual March for Life. It's held on the anniversary of the Supreme Court's Roe v. Wade decision, and even the arrival of what forecasters are predicting will be an historic blizzard didn't discourage the passionate demonstrators.
Oh no, we're from South Dakota, so we're used to it.
It's all about love, it's all about pro-life.
Pro-life advocates say their newest strategy is to find common ground, pointing to a new Marist poll that shows more than 80% of Americans favor significant abortion restrictions, such as banning it altogether, limiting it to the first trimester, or to circumstances involving rape, incest, or threats to the mother's life. That includes 2/3 of those who self-identified as pro-choice.
Science is on our side. Public opinion is on our side. We are winning this fight, ladies and gentlemen.
This march through the heart of Washington ends essentially where the debate really heated up decades ago, at the U.S. Supreme Court, which decided Roe v. Wade, essentially legalizing abortion nationwide. Today, President Obama issued a statement vowing to protect the rights secured by Roe against, quote, efforts to undermine or overturn them, adding, quote, in America, every single one of us deserves the rights, freedoms, and opportunities to fulfill our dreams. The battle returns to the Supreme Court on March 2nd, when the justices will consider a Texas law requiring, among other things, that abortion doctors have admitting privileges within 30 miles of their clinics.
And it is just wrong for the anti-abortion industry to use that as a ruse to shut down clinics and to prevent women from getting the health care that they deserve.
In Washington, Shannon Bream, Fox News.
Ron Leggett literally lives in the shadows. This dugout on a ball field in Lakewood is where he sleeps, or tries to anyway, bundled up in blankets and old clothes with his back turned to block the headlights of the oncoming traffic.
Oh, good night. I'll be bundled up in them covers in a few minutes.
But now a recent incident at a downtown gas station has thrust Ron into the spotlight, thanks to a Facebook post by someone who witnessed what happened.
Yeah, it happened right in this area right here.
Leggett says he was scouring the parking lot for discarded lottery tickets, hoping to find an overlooked winner, when he was approached by a man who made a bizarre proposal.
And asked me if I wanted to make $5, and I said, yes, I'd like to. And he explained to me if I poured this coffee on my head, he would take a picture of me and give me $5. And it happened 2 times, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Ron told me that he was so hard up for money, he'd let the man film him. But when a bystander saw what was going on, he stepped in to put a stop to it.
And a friend of mine rolls around the corner in his car and said, "What are you doing? You're not supposed to do that to this man." And he started arguing with the fella. And honestly, I don't know his name. But he's there every day. And I always say hi to him. He just seems to be a very nice gentleman. He plays a lot of lottery tickets.
Welcome back. Straight now to the Index and an update on the Zika virus. It's a health alert tonight. Officials say 3 people from the New York City area who'd recently traveled outside the country have tested positive for the mosquito-borne virus. The CDC has released an updated map showing a total of 22 countries. You see them there, most of them in Latin America and the Caribbean, where there have been outbreaks. Zika can cause fever, rash, and joint pain, but the real danger is for pregnant women, in which it can cause severe birth defects.
El Salvador is joining the list of Latin American countries urging women to delay getting pregnant. It's concerned about the Zika virus carried by mosquitoes and linked to birth defects. El Salvador is telling women to wait 2 years to have children. 20 countries have cases of this virus, with Brazil by far the hardest hit.
The Index, the major recall tonight, bagged salad by Dole, now being linked to a listeria outbreak that killed at least 1 person and sent 11 others to the hospital. The salad sold under several popular brand names, and we've listed them on our website.
We just had an earthquake.
We're still
It's going
having
on.
an earthquake.
Going on right now.
Holy freaking cow!
An earthquake measuring 6.3 on the Richter scale affected areas on the north coast of Morocco and the south of Spain in the early hours of Monday morning. The epicenter of the quake, which happened at 4:22 a.m. local time, was in the Mediterranean Sea between Spain and Morocco, and by 8 a.m. a total of 9 aftershocks have been registered, the strongest of which measured 4.5 on the Richter scale. The quake was felt in Spanish cities. The effects were mostly noted in the Spanish enclave of Melilla, where hundreds of people took to the street for fear of their homes collapsing. There have been no reported victims of the quake, which happened at a depth of 10 kilometers. Although substantial material damage was caused in Melilla, where cracks in buildings and parts of facades and balconies have collapsed. Authorities in the city have decided to keep schools and colleges closed in order to carry out safety checks.
I've never forgotten the scene in 2011 of school children who drowned in Japan's catastrophic tsunami. I found their bodies in a gym. They had been evacuated there because it was the tallest structure, but not nearly tall enough. Well, today in the American Northwest, communities are debating how to save lives from a similar tsunami after an earthquake that is overdue. Don Daler reports.
During their regular earthquake and tsunami drills, students at this elementary school in Westport, Washington, practice going to the top floor. But with the Pacific Ocean just a few thousand feet away, scientists say these drills might be futile because the inevitable tsunami could be higher than the school.
As soon as the earth shakes, get here.
Superintendent Paula Ackerland.
Scientists tell us it will happen at some point. It's very unpredictable as to when, so we need to be prepared.
That's why construction workers are racing to finish this vertical evacuation structure, the first of its kind in North America. The shelter sits on the roof of a new school, rising 44 feet high with 14-inch thick walls. It could save thousands of students and residents seeking refuge. Like the Japanese earthquake and tsunamis in 2011 that killed nearly 16,000. Seismologists say there is an impending disaster coming this way. 70 miles off America's Pacific Northwest, from Northern California to Vancouver Island, sits the fault line known as the Cascadia Subduction Zone, where the oceanic plate is slowly being forced beneath the North American plate.
It buckles upward, and it gets pushed backward like a spring until eventually, after a few hundred years, it just has to let go.
For 25 years, Oregon State earthquake geologist Chris Goldfinger has warned of the possibility of disaster. He and other scientists have been collecting core samples of sediment from the ocean floor.
These sand layers that you can see are, we believe, past earthquakes.
They've discovered that major earthquakes happen here an average of every 240 years. The last major Cascadia earthquake was 315 years ago. The big one, scientists say, is overdue.
There's nothing that compares to magnitude 9 earthquake that North America has experienced in human history.
Similar to what happened in Japan, FEMA estimates in that case a tsunami could hit some areas within 15 minutes. Collapsed roads and bridges could cut off coastal towns and major cities like Portland, Olympia, and Seattle, potentially stranding 7 million people.
These roads are in red. Is that because they could conceivably be impacted and not be passable?
Absolutely.
Kenneth Murphy is FEMA's regional administrator.
Is FEMA ready for the big one?
I would never say we are ready.
What is the best case scenario for an 8.0?
At least 10,000 plus that would be killed, from the tsunami.
The numbers go way up with a 9.0 or greater magnitude.
They tremendously go up. We're talking numbers that this nation, I'm not sure, is really prepared to deal with.
Severe turbulence on an American Airlines flight sends 7 people to the hospital. The flight, carrying 205 passengers, was on its way from Miami to Milan. When it briefly hit turbulence, the plane was diverted to Canada, where paramedics evaluated passengers and crew.
The plane actually dropped.
It rolled on its side and everything went flying and people and so it was pretty intense. So.
Pretty much got into the turbulence. It hit like a big dip, and that's some flight attendants were without seatbelts, and then they hurt themselves, and then the other people, like, I guess people passed out, because it was bad, scary. So a lot of people, I guess some people got low blood pressure and they needed oxygen or something.
In Egypt, this week marks the 5th anniversary of the insurrection that toppled President Hosni Mubarak. Egypt has boosted security amid fears of more violence. Militant groups have increased attacks since 2013, when a military coup ousted President Mohamed Morsi.
Thursday's bomb was a shocking incident to many residents of Greater Cairo. It was the first explosion in a residential area that leaves such extensive damage. Around 20 policemen and civilians were killed and injured in that attack.
That bomb is linked to January 25th anniversary, without a doubt. I believe many terrorist cells were preparing for that anniversary by manufacturing explosive devices. They were planning to put these explosives in vital areas. It's an Al-Qaeda ideology adopted by some extremist supporters of the Brotherhood.
Security forces managed to discover that terrorist cell before it activates its plan. The attack, however, alarmed the country that more might be coming to mark the January uprising's anniversary. The country stands in defiance against these possible attacks. In a display of solidarity, President El-Sisi awarded the families of police victims of last year's terrorist attacks, vowing vengeance from these groups.
فأين الاستفادة من التجارب وفهم الواقع؟ ها هم الإخوان مرة أخرى وحالهم لا يخفى على أحد. أين فهم الواقع؟ ها هو طاغوت آخر في مصر خلف لمبارك. يا إخواني، لم نعد كسابق عهدنا نقول لأبنائنا هيا لتحرروا بيت المقدس، بل إننا الآن نقول لأنفسنا لماذا لا نحرر نحن الأقصى؟ لماذا لا نفك قيود الأسرى؟ لماذا لا تشتهي عيوننا قسطنطينية وأسيافنا روما؟
For the East, and there are kings of the East in the book of Revelation. They are the power source and the power force of the tribulation. The West is not mentioned. There's no mention of kings of the West. There's no mention of the West at all, hardly in prophecy. I mean, it's just not there. The West being specifically the United States, we have Canada, the U.S., we've got also Latin America is considered the Western Hemisphere. And you've got Britain, the UK, etc. But something has to happen. Bill, can we go there and just for a moment?
from Syria in Germany claims he spotted a man with ties to the Islamists living there. The former Islamic State hostage recognized a pro-ISIL soldier, who he says stood guard at their town when it was under the control of the terrorists. Peter Oliver has more.
The last time I was here in Germany's Saarland region on the border with France was to meet a group of Assyrian Christians who'd been freed after being held hostage by Islamic State.
There were times we prayed that they would just shoot us if it came to that. We prayed that they would not behead us.
But now a stark reminder of their time in captivity has appeared here in Germany. Those held hostage say that a man with ties to ISIL is living in the same city. One agreed to speak with me on the condition his identity was kept secret. How can you be sure that the man you identified is the person you think he is?
He stopped me several times at the checkpoint near our village. We were even able to find him on Facebook. I go to the webpage and there's this guy again. I'm convinced that this is the same person I knew in Syria.
So when you first saw him, what was your immediate reaction?
I was very scared that this terrorist is in a democratic state like Germany just living here. We feel very insecure now. Some of our Assyrian community want to leave this place, as this was not the first case, but we don't know where to run.
Assyrian community leaders say that once they were convinced, they went straight to the police.
Police have taken this very seriously, but we worry that the law cannot back this up with a strong case. They have to wait until this person does something criminal here. But those people were killers in Syria, and fly the ISIS flag here even. Such people should have no place in Germany.
Police confirmed that an investigation is underway in this case, but that at the current time, no charges relating to terrorism or any other crime have been brought, which is why we aren't naming or showing any images of the individual being investigated. Last February, Islamic State kidnapped around 250 Assyrian Christians and were demanding ransoms of $100,000 per person. Some have been released, but many remain in captivity.
ISIS came to our village. They devastated our fields, burnt our churches, tore apart our lives. They kidnapped us, murdered us. We have an unbearable feeling of loss.
There's also the fear that ISIL and other jihadist groups are looking to exploit the refugee crisis to enter Europe.
When I was a hostage, I overheard a conversation between my captors. They were saying that the West will belong to us, and we will conquer it through Islamization. One of those that held me was a German who had converted to radical Islam. He was part of this conversation.
Well, as this investigation continues and with refugees still arriving in Europe, more questions are being asked about just who is coming.
French Prime Minister Manuel Valls has warned that the refugee crisis is jeopardizing the very idea of the EU. Speaking to British media at the Economic Forum in Davos, Valls said Europe cannot take in all refugees fleeing wars in Syria and Iraq. He called on European leaders to take urgent action to control the continent's external borders. Should they fail to do so, the French Prime Minister warned of, quote, totally destabilized societies. Earlier in the day on the sidelines of the forum, Valls also voiced concern over the idea of Britain leaving the bloc, saying that would be a tragedy.
Austria has deployed about 500 troops to help police carry out rigorous checks on every refugee trying to enter the country from neighboring Slovenia.
We must massively reinforce our border controls. Austria cannot accommodate all asylum seekers.
Apart from tightening border controls, the country has also imposed a new limit on those seeking asylum. This year, Austria will only accept 37,000 applications, which is less than half the number of 2015. However, among some Austrians, there's a feeling the government's losing control over the situation and they're just trying to take justice now, the people that is, into their own hands. Videos has emerged on social media claiming to show instant justice by Austrians against a group of Afghan refugees. It apparently comes after migrants attempted to rob a commuter at a Vienna station. Locals blocked in the assailants and the situation escalated into a brawl.
In hours of the first shots being fired on November the 13th last year, the French government had declared a state of emergency, drastically increasing police powers under what Paris described as extraordinary circumstances. The emergency measures are due to end on February 26th, but in the coming days, the French President François Hollande will ask his government to extend the state of emergency for another 3 months. France remains on high alert following 2 major terror attacks in 2015, and anti-terrorism experts warned that things could get worse in the coming year.
I think that in 2016, France will face new threats as a result of the difficulties that Daesh is experiencing in the Middle East, and because of the risk that Sahel may erupt again. So we are in the year 2016, confronted by the new threat in France, but also overseas, where French interests are targeted.
With a sense among the French public that another attack could happen at any moment, ending the state of emergency is a very delicate issue for the French government. But rights groups say the emergency measures are no longer justified and seriously impact public freedoms.
Since David Cameron came to power, the UK's arms supplies to Saudi Arabia have surged. Estimates show the UK has provided the kingdom with fighter jets, weaponry and military hardware worth of, £5.5 billion since 2010. Well, that number appears to have skyrocketed in recent months with an 11,000% spike in missile sales. It comes amid Riyadh's military campaign in Yemen, which has sparked a storm of criticism over the number of civilian deaths. William Whiteman reports.
The figures show sales of British weaponry to Saudi Arabia reaching over £1 billion in just 3 months in 2015, an increase of 11,000% compared to the 9 million sales mark reached during the previous 3-month period.
Iranian commander vows a crushing response to any possible act of aggression against the Islamic Republic. The second in command of the Islamic Revolution Guards Corps, Brigadier General Hossein Salami, has warned that Iran's armed forces are determined to defend the country's territorial integrity and interests in case of any invasion. Salami added that the recent capture of American sailors in the Persian Gulf waters was further proof of Iran's naval power. The IRGC released the 10 sailors on board 2 U.S. military vessels that mistakenly entered the Iranian territorial waters. Washington thanked Tehran for the way it handled the incident. The IRGC Navy said the sailors were freed after U.S. officials promised that such mistakes won't happen again.
The first Chinese president to visit Iran in 14 years. Xi Jinping was warmly welcomed by Iranian President Hassan Rouhani. To start this historic visit, Xi signed 16 accords, including a strategic cooperation agreement, as he seeks to improve China's ties with Iran and to start a new season of comprehensive, long-term, and sustainable relations. The two countries established diplomatic ties in 1971, and their relations have since enjoyed sound and steady development. China has been Iran's biggest trading partner. Their two-way trade started from tens of millions of US dollars in the 1970s, but it jumped to more than $51 billion in 2014. And according to Rouhani, this will increase to $600 billion in the next 10 years. This state visit has made China and Iran's friendship go further. In the press conference, Rouhani welcomed stronger ties with China, especially in what he termed as post-sanction era.
We are happy that President Xi visited Iran after the lifting of sanctions. Iran and China have agreed on forming strategic relations, as reflected in a 25-year comprehensive document.
Xi, meanwhile, said China seeks strategic ties with Iran, especially in the energy market.
The leader of Iran's Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, says the West has never been able to win the Iranian nation's trust. Ayatollah Khamenei made that remark in a meeting with the visiting Chinese President Xi Jinping. The leader said the domineering policies adopted by certain countries, particularly the US, and their insincere cooperation with other nations have prompted independent countries to seek closer partnership among themselves.
Hi, Andreas here. I am always on the lookout for new innovation together with our customers. A few weeks ago I had an NFC chip injected into my hand just beneath the skin. While I'm certainly not the first person to have an NFC implant, in this video I am probably the first person to pass through an airport, through security, through lounge registration, through the gate to the aircraft to board a flight with only the NFC chip. So I had no boarding pass physical with me during this trip.